One of the strongest arguments made in favor of abortion is that it actually takes away or steals from the woman the right to choose or to have autonomy over her own body. Well, as discussed in the last video, that particular argument falls short when we realize that the life inside of her is not actually her own body. So, an abortion actually makes a decision for two people. She is making a decision of something she will do with her own body, but her decision is also affecting the body of another human being. And as we know from God's word, human beings come into being the moment of conception. And so from the moment of conception all the way up until till birth, to prevent or stop that human life from forming or being born is abortion. And it is outside the purview of any human being, whether it be a man or a woman, to make the decision to end someone else's life before it has begun. Now, what we want to talk about now, though, is related to this concept of a woman's right to choose. The Bible gives women full autonomy, full decision-making power over their own bodies. And any time that this decision is taken away from a woman, it is an egregious sin. It absolutely should not happen. So let's talk about this in the context of abortion, because the reason that an abortion would take place is because a decision has been made. Life only begins when two human beings have a sexual encounter. Now, in the vast majority of situations, this sexual human encounter comes through an act of will and it is intentional. Now, regardless of whether or not it was a good decision, if it was well thought through, or if maybe there were other substances such as alcohol or some kind of drug involved that may have made that decision a little bit watered down, or that person wasn't thinking clearly, those things don't always really factor into this because a decision was made. A woman has the right to choose whether or not she is going to have sex with someone else. Now, right now in the media, there's a lot of talk about The Handmaid's Tale. And The Handmaid's Tale is a current retelling of this idea of women who are forced into having sex and then are forced into carrying those babies to full term and to give birth. Now, I think anyone would agree that that is wrong and that would be sinful. However, to draw a correlation between The Handmaid's Tale and what is happening with Roe versus Wade being overturned, so that abortion may not be legal in every state, you can't make that correlation because it's not equal in nature. They're not the same thing. When a woman makes the decision to have sex, and when a man makes the decision to have sex, they do this knowing that there is the potential of the creation of a human life. Now, the only reason that a person would go into that lightly would be because they do not value human life, or maybe they do not understand that human life begins at the moment of conception. But again, as followers of Jesus, as people who understand that God's word is the foundation for our lives, well, we understand the responsibility that comes with a sexual relationship. This is why God gives us boundaries for how sex is to be enjoyed. Sex is meant to be a wonderful thing. It's meant to bring a deeper connection of intimacy within a relationship. It's meant to produce life and children, which is a joy, and it's meant to feel good and to be pleasurable. However, for sex to be done correctly and to be enjoyed fully, God says that it can only be done within a committed married relationship. So, any sex outside of a married relationship is outside of God's will, outside of his boundaries, outside of his plan, and we call that sin. The reason for that is because it can easily become destructive. Because if two people who are not committed to each other engage in sex and they produce a life, well, now that life can become very burdensome, it becomes complicated, and it often leads to fear. It can lead to economic hardship. It can lead to all of these difficult situations that often lead people to make the decision for abortion. That is why sex is a great and serious responsibility. And unfortunately, in our culture, we handle it way too casually. We've justified it We've made it more of an icebreaker in a relationship rather than something that should be reserved for the sanctity of marriage, because it is something that God intends to be a blessing. But if it's done incorrectly, it can often become a curse. Now, let's talk about this idea of this added responsibility upon a woman, because obviously it's only the woman that has to carry a child to term and to give birth. So there is more responsibility placed upon a woman in regards to sex than to a man. Because after a man has had sex, he can pretty much walk away from that situation. And if he chooses, never have anything to do with that woman or that potential child again. The woman doesn't have that ability. For at least a period of 9 months, she's going to carry that child with her. And then if she gives birth to that child, she's either going to have that child for her life, or she's going to give it up for adoption and remember that she's done that for the rest of her life. So again, these are serious, serious issues that should not be taken lightly. And women are given a higher level of responsibility. However, women are also given a gift. Every woman that is able to give birth to a child is given the gift of the miracle of childbirth. This is something that a man will never experience. Can't wrap my head around it. I know that there's also a lot of pain. There's a lot of difficulty that goes through the process of having a child. But in and of itself, the ability to carry and give birth to another human being is a miraculous gift from God. And so with that miraculous gift does come a higher level of responsibility. Now, let's talk about some of the other suggestions that are often made regarding why abortions should be allowed. One of the things is that they will say that if a woman becomes pregnant through incest or rape, well, first we need to acknowledge that those are horrific circumstances, and any woman who has experienced incest or rape needs to be deeply cared for, needs to be able to receive counseling, needs people to come alongside of her and to help her through that. However, the question that I think we need to ask at the very least is, why should we punish the innocent human life in that situation? I mean, if our argument is that someone needs to die as a result of incest or rape, well, why does it need to be the innocent child? Why not the perpetrator? Now, I'm not advocating for that, but that often seems to be people's reaction, is that death must occur as a result. So abortion should take place. Well, I think that's a faulty argument. I think if someone is going to die because of or as a consequence of incest or rape, it should be the one who caused that to happen. Now, the other side of this argument is that statistically, less than 1% of abortions occur because of incest or rape. Many women who have gone through that, and again, that is a horrific thing. I believe that we should absolutely provide and care for these women to give them the support that they need after facing something so horrific. We also know that getting an abortion does not make the pain and suffering from that experience easier. Many times it complicates it, because now they realize that they're eliminating an innocent human life in addition to the trauma that they have experienced. My thought on this is, if we are really serious that this 1% of abortions has to stay in order for the other 99% to go away, I'm okay with saying that's a starting place. Let's get rid of the other 99% and leave the door open for conversation for that 1%. What's telling is that pro-abortion advocates are not willing to stop there. Most pro-abortion advocates today fighting for abortion, lobbying for this to stay legal, they believe that abortion should be available to everyone for any reason whatsoever up to the point of birth. Now, that's an extreme position that cares very little about rape or incest. The other argument that is often brought into this equation is, well, what about abortions that are necessary in order to save a mother's life? Well, there have been many, many doctors who have come forward that have stated that an actual abortion purely for the sake of saving a mother's life physically occurs very, very rarely. And 1% would be a high mark of the actual number of abortions. Now, what does sometimes occur is you have a woman's life who might be endangered. My wife experienced this in her first pregnancy, where she was no longer going to be able to carry our youngest or our oldest child and survive. And so what they did was they actually went in and they delivered our daughter via cesarean. Now, there was a higher chance that our daughter would not survive outside of the womb after that cesarean than if she would have been carried to full term. However, we knew that that was something that was necessary because otherwise both mother and baby would have passed away. If our daughter would have passed away as a result of that, that would not have been an abortion. An abortion is the intentional ending of life. Having a cesarean for the sake of preventing the mother's death, the purpose of that is not to kill the baby. And everything is done to be able to preserve that baby's life outside of the womb. So there is a difference. But again, it's less than 1%. So even if you add those two things together and you say, okay, so we're going to keep the door open for the possibility of abortion for these 2% of cases, but the other 98% of cases go away. I think that's a great starting point of a conversation to have, to say, okay, let's get away with the other 98% and let's keep talking about this other 2%. But that's not what the majority of pro-abortionists are after. They want abortion for any reason, for any person, any situation, with absolutely zero restrictions, even for minors to be able to come in and get abortions without their parents knowing. In fact, that's the legislation that they tried to pass just this last week that ultimately failed to get even a majority, which I believe is a blessing, because I cannot imagine legalizing or instate or making abortion legal for in that capacity for everyone on a national level, how much innocent life would be ended as a result of that. In the next video, we're going to talk a little bit about what abortion ultimately is.